Welcome back. Still tuned in to Salam Media. The time is 18 minutes past 8, and now we'll be shedding light into, I think, a very, very important and interesting topic. One that broke the news yesterday. The South African economy is in a precarious position. Rising debt, sluggish growth, and an overstretched budget have raised concerns about the country's financial future. The recent delay in the budget speech yesterday has only deepened uncertainty, leaving many wondering how the government will balance its increasing expenditure with limited revenue. Meanwhile, there are growing fears that the proposed VAT hike and other tax measures could disproportionately affect the poor and further widen the economic inequalities. And to help us unpack these issues, we're joined by Dominic Brown, who's an economic justice coordinator, and is going to help us discuss the state of South Africa's economy, the implications of the budget delay, and what this ultimately means for you and I, the ordinary citizens of Mzansi. Dominic, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media. Really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
First and foremost, before we get to the nitty-gritties of the state of our economy and the delay and implications of yesterday's delayed budget speech, just to get your reaction on that, what did you make of it? The fact that for the first time since the dawn of democracy, we had a budget speech delayed, very, very unprecedented.
Indeed. For me, it speaks to a lack of democratic engagement with the budget, with the wider range of the public beyond the National Assembly. There were 100,000 petitions collected from people around the country demanding that government end budget cuts and that it taxes the rich for a budget that prioritizes the needs of the people and the planet over the profits of the rich. When we called on the finance minister, the deputy finance minister, to collect these or receive these 100,000 petitions the day before the national budget on Tuesday, the 18th, where we wanted to give all of these 100,000 petitions over, they failed to come to the People's Budget Assembly. And similarly, yesterday at the budget speech, they sent a bureaucrat to collect the memorandum. So it occurs to us that the National Treasury and the government as a whole doesn't take the voices of the majority of people seriously. Secondly, I think also on the political issues that I think this is postulating from the DA as the budget is actually gone through with all parliamentarians prior to the announcement of the budget. And so it seems as if the DA, who would normally be happy with VAT increase, is using this as a political tactic to try and show that it cares about poor working class South Africans. But in reality, it's about grandstanding and trying to outflank other political parties, including the ANC. It's also shocking that the DA is able to do this to the ANC, and embarrassing, I think, for the ANC, as they claim to be a political party whose interests lie with the majority of South Africans. Yet they are the ones who put forward this 2 percentage point VAT increase. So I think that's really the politics of this. When we look at the substance of the budget, I think when we talk about a 2 percentage point increase in VAT from 15% to 17%, in reality, that's a 13.3% increase in prices. And so it's not just a 2% increase. More than that, often when a VAT increase is implemented, many shopping centers and others increase prices by far more anyway, as they factor in that people expect there will be a price increase. And so you see, in fact, an even higher increase in the total prices. So the implications of this, of course, would be raising another 58 billion rand, but leading to greater pressure on the majority of poor and working class South Africans who are already unable to make ends meet.
Mm.
Uh, so the VAT increase should definitely be rejected with contempt. So then the question is, how do you raise additional revenue so that we can finance additional spending to social services, public health care, public education, and employment creation? And I mean, one of the big concerns for us, just in parenthesis, is that there's approximately 1,800 qualified doctors who are unemployed in the country because the state hasn't set aside sufficient resources to employ them. And we can talk about a host of other people who are qualified, be it teachers, nurses, social workers, people that are desperately needed for service delivery in South Africa, yet even as they are sitting with skills, they are unemployed. And the issue there is the lack of money going to the budget. So now you say South Africa is cash strapped and highly indebted. Well, this may seem to be true on the surface, but in reality, South Africa has a lot more money than National Treasury and the government is speaking about. Just this week, AIDC released a research publication which says that 200 billion rand in foregone revenue is lost as a result of above inflationary increases to tax brackets, which actually puts people who earn more than half a million rand a year and more in lower tax brackets. And over the past 10, 15 years, the effective tax rates of the very rich have declined substantially by almost 30% over this period. Now, just to roll back the above inflationary increases to bracket creep for those earning above 500,000 a year could raise a substantial amount of revenue, more than 4 times what could be raised through the VAT increase. And it would contribute to dealing with inequalities in the country. More than addressing bracket creep, and this is even without changing the existing tax structural framework, it's important to look at other potential tax instruments that can contribute to harnessing additional revenue, as well as dealing with the problem of inequalities in the country. And of course, many have been advocating for the implementation of a progressive net wealth tax on the top 1% of wealth owners in the country. And this in and of itself would raise an additional 140 billion rand in revenue each year. We also think that we need to end tax dodging by big corporations who shift profits to tax havens, resulting in more than 400 billion rand being shifted out of the country each year and 100 billion rand in lost corporate income tax revenue. So we're talking close to 400, 500 billion rand in additional revenue that can be used to spend more on public services.
Mm.
Over and above that, there's a range of other potential instruments in South Africa's balance sheet for greater domestic resource mobilization, including, for example, utilizing accumulated reserves of the public pension funds to be directed in investing in an industrialization program, enhancing the manufacturing base, which would also contribute to creating employment and labor-intensive industries, which could significantly contribute to reducing unemployment in the country.
Mm. Let's talk about the ordinary citizens, ordinary South Africans, because I feel like usually when we speak the economy, we use such technical jargon that sometimes it goes over their heads, and they just want to know: is South Africa in a good place? Is this still a country where you can raise a family, you can afford the basic necessities to live, and how can they also interpret what happened yesterday, without the use of the technical jargon, just from a ordinary South African's point of view? How should they take yesterday's delay of the budget speech and how it might affect them?
I mean, in simple terms, the point is that the reason why there's no budget is not because there's not agreement of the substance of the budget. It's a lack of agreement between the main parties about politics, and they are trying to outmaneuver each other within the GNU, especially looking towards 2026 local government elections. So I think when we look at it at the substantive level, which is what's in this budget that never was, we see that there's an increased privatization agenda. So they want to privatize more aspects of the economy, along with a massive increase in prices, because increasing VAT from 15% to 17% is a 13% increase in prices. But shops already expect or understand that people in South Africa will expect prices to rise because of this proposed VAT increase, which should be rejected. So they increase prices even more in anticipation of this expectation of rising prices. So in reality, instead of a 13% increase in goods and services, we could see 18 to 20% increase in prices. This is enormous. This is something that most people cannot afford. Most people are already highly indebted, cash-strapped, and struggling to make ends meet. We have a problem of growing hunger. This is issues that the VAT increase and more privatization will make worse, right? And behind all of this is the idea that South Africa doesn't have money. And I think this is where we need to say that, to show us how you can say that, because we, as AIDC and many others, have shown proposals that of where more money can be found that also tackles the very rich people in this country, as opposed to putting greater tax burdens on the poor. And so that's where all the elements of where we can look at tax, like corporate income tax, wealth taxes, personal income taxes on the very rich, should be the priority. And when we do that, you'll see a huge amount of revenue that can be raised. And this is important to raise this revenue in order to finance the goods and services that meets people's needs. And here, there's a number of key areas: healthcare, education, transport, employment creating strategies. When we look at these departments, they're heavily underfunded. They're so underfunded that they're not able to employ people who already have the skills. So you have qualified doctors, qualified teachers, qualified nurses sitting at home because there are no jobs for them. And so that's the reality that we're facing. And South Africa is becoming increasingly challenging to live in.
Yeah, and I think a lot of South Africans will definitely agree with you on that front. And one issue which has become a talking point, regarding the state of our economy is South Africa's debt to GDP ratio, which is projected to reach around 75% by 2027, 2028. How sustainable is this level of debt, and what risks does it pose to the economy? And is there any mitigating factors that can be put in place by government?
So when we look at the debt to GDP ratio, 75% is not a ratio that's above that of similar countries with similarly sized economies. So the level of debt to GDP in South Africa is very much in line with international trends.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is that when we look at the debt to GDP ratio, we also need to look at the composition of South Africa's debt. How much debt is owed to who and in what currency? Now, in relation to this, South Africa is in a favorable situation when 90% of the government debt is owed in rands, which is highly favorable as opposed to high levels of debt denominated in foreign exchange, like dollars, euros, are the main currencies that our foreign debts are in.
Mm.
So this means we don't have to raise additional foreign currency to be able to pay off the government debt. So that's a positive. In addition to that, you have to. There's a third point, which is that there's no debt to GDP ratio that is good or bad. The bigger question is, or the bigger questions are rather, what was the debt used for? And what is your public debt management strategy that can ensure that over the medium to long term, the debts that have been taken out or incurred contributes to improving your productive capacity in your country, which means that you contribute to growing your economy. And if your GDP grows, the ratio of debt to GDP declines over time. More than that, uh, in terms of South Africa's debt situation, so really all of this is to say that we're not in a debt crisis. It is alarming that there's been a massive growth in the debt, but again, this is also along the similar lines of international trends since the end of the 2008-2009 global financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so the first point is that it's budget cuts is not necessary, given the fact that the government debt situation is in fact within a manageable it is manageable. But secondly, I should add that we should understand that when government reduces spending to social services and employment creation areas, it contributes to a contraction in the economy. The economy slows down. So even though you're prioritizing paying more in debt service costs, whilst doing so, the economy stagnates or shrinks, which ultimately results in a continuation of high debt to GDP levels over time. So austerity and budget cuts is therefore not only unnecessary to deal with growing levels of public debt, it's also undesirable. So then you need to evaluate what are more effective public debt management strategies. And this is where I think the South African government needs to review austerity, which has failed in terms of managing public debt over the past 40, 50 years, and look towards investing heavily in growing the economy um, through an industrialization program, which would over time uh, contribute significantly to reducing the debt burden.
All right, Dominic Brown, thank you so much for your insights. We're going to leave it here for now. I really, really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you.
There you go. That was AIDC Economic Justice Coordinator Dominic Brown, just giving us his thoughts and insights on the delay in the budget speeches, raising a lot of concerns. The rand is struggling and huffing and puffing against the dollar, and you could tell there's a lot of uncertainty. And all of us right now just need to kind of almost understand without the need of the technical jargon, understand how all of this is going to be affecting us. And one thing which is really interesting for me is the fact that we now have a government of national unity in place. Is this going to be the norm? Are we going to see more important legislation that needs to be passed, or budgets that need to be passed that are going to be delayed, that are going to be heavily discussed within the government of national unity? And we're going to have a situation like this more often than not. So it's going to be interesting going forward how this government of national unity, because this was supposed to be their first budget speech, but ironically, it didn't happen. And this was because of that proposed 2% VAT hike. The Democratic Alliance saying, well, it's not going to happen. A lot of people lauding the DA for that, saying, good move. The 2% VAT hike was going to affect the poor of the poorest in South Africa, and also the ordinary South Africans, the middle to lower class citizens of this country. A 2% VAT increase from 15% to 17% might not sound like it's a lot, but realistically speaking, as you heard from Dominic there, it means almost a 13% increase in basic necessities. So your food basket would increase by a further 13%, and it's already unsustainably expensive. So yeah, I think a lot of people loading the DA, but on another front, there's another section that say, well, this is political posturing from the Democratic Alliance. They want votes, they want to outplay the ANC, and it seems like it's working, because online, economists, social media, everyone seems to believe that this was a good move. South Africans can't afford a 2% VAT hike. You can tell us what you think. You can engage with us on our various social media platforms. Do you think the 2% VAT hike discussion between the ANC and the DA, where the DA ultimately said it's not going to happen, we rather delay the budget speech, was political posturing, or it was a genuine move to help South Africans who are going through very, very difficult economic times? You can engage with us. Our number is 061 766 0355, or you can call us on 0116800355. We're going to continue with this topic. It's a big one. It's an unprecedented state of affairs that we find ourselves in, because never in the 30 years of our democracy have we had a budget speech cancelled. We're going to have governance, politics, and development specialist Lokhona Mnguni join us after this, and we're going to unpack it from a government and, I think, political front, what this ultimately means and why we find ourselves where we are today. So more on that after the short break.